Welcome to another video coverage of This Week in Rails. I'm Dave Kimura, and today we have Zach bringing us the updates. I don't create the This Week in Rails newsletter, but instead I simply provide the video coverage of it. So let's go ahead and dive right in. And for the first item, the call for a proposal for Rails World is going to end on June 16. It is currently open, so if you're wanting to give a talk, be sure to submit your proposal. And we got a new release of Rails. It's now 7.0.5, and it fixed a lot of bugs. So if we look at it, which I think the link is broken, but we can just go back to it, there's a lot of different change logs. So one thing that I do whenever there is a new Rails drop is I'll go through and I'll middle click on each one of these items, and that's going to open it up in a new tab. And from there, I'll go through and see from the previous update, if that's a version I'm on, to the new release, what has been changed. And so it'll take a few minutes to go through everything. Sometimes there's going to be no changes, and other times the changes are going to be a bit longer. But with any Rails update, it's important to have good test coverage, and as you are updating your Rails version, to make sure that all your tests are still passing. And I also do a regression test, so I'll launch my application and test through the main points or the happy path of anything that could generate a support ticket. And the next item, there is a performance improvement of MemoryStore, so the default MemoryStore that ships with Rails applications. And this is pretty cool because a lot of times the default MemoryStore is going to be good enough. So instead of using something like Redis, you can use the MemoryStore, which is going to use the memory on the actual machine instead of a third-party service. And on simple applications, I would start with this before you went to something else like Redis or Memcached. Once you outgrow this, by either having multiple servers, or you're starting to reach the resource limits of that particular server, you can then switch to something like Redis or Memcached. Next, there was a refactor to the error highlight detection, and it was basically a situation where you would have the correct version of the highlight gem installed, but it was still giving an error. So this is just refactoring the error handling around the error highlights, so that it'll be a bit more stable. And the next item is a documentation update within the RDoc. So it was actually a huge update and a pretty simple one, but 98 files were changed, and it's all around the documentation using the short form for the fixed width. And for the next item, if you're working with Rails engines and tests, then this is going to automatically add the test fixtures into the engine's fixture path. And this is just handling the boilerplate code that you would need to include the fixtures within your Rails engine for your unit tests. And the next item, fix change in place for binary serialized columns. And this one has to do with the data type binary. And so if we looked at the files changed, the main thing is right here, where you have a binary data type. Before, it was just taking the value and returning a string, and now it's going to make sure it's binary unless the encoding is equal to binary. And I actually enjoyed reading the conversation on this one because it's one of those things where you can learn a lot about the inner workings of Rails or just some of the potentially upcoming breaking changes. And the next item is run after bundle blocks with app template commands. And so Rails application templates is a huge thing of what I do on a daily basis. Whenever I'm creating new Rails applications, I'll create and apply different templates depending on what I'm building. And so for this simple example, if you have the gem device, the after bundle, meaning that once it's installed the gems, you would then want to run the Rails generate device install. And so prior to this change, this would work as intended when you're creating new Rails applications. However, if you had existing Rails applications that you're wanting to apply a template on, something like a Rails app template, and then you pass in the template, then it would not run that after bundle. And I actually use them quite a bit, especially on Rubidium, which is just a place where I'll host different app templates. So you can go in and look at the different templates and see the changes between the different versions. However, it is using that Rails app template, passing in the variable location, and then you can point and reference to that particular template. And next, we have the ERB utility. HTML escape once now always returns an HTML safe string. And this bug fix is basically ensuring that it's not getting double escaped. So if you had an ampersand, instead of it getting in there twice, then it's going to just render correctly. And next we have clone empty has been deprecated. It hasn't been used within the Rails codebase since it was removed in 2014, so it's good that they're cleaning up stuff that's no longer being used. And so this is another good point where when you're doing your Rails upgrades, you should do them incrementally, because on the next major release or a minor release, if this is deprecated, then your application could run into some problems if you were using that private API, or if there was a gem using it that you were unaware of. But by doing incremental updates of Rails, then you would see that within your logs, and you know that something is requiring your attention before you do the next major update. And next we got an update around the common table expressions when using the with expression. And this is going to add materialized or not materialized hints within the generated SQL statement. And next we have another deprecation with action mailer, and this is around tests, and you can just assert that a mail is enqueued with, and then you can pass in the params. And next we have a bug fix with the empty values within delimited authorization header. And so this one's a pretty interesting read. And so if you've ever gotten this kind of error, like an argument error, invalid number of elements 0 for 1 to 2, that's a really annoying error, especially if it's something that's not caused from your application, but instead you're doing a Rails update or something and then you got that error, and tracking that down, while isn't too hard, can be a bit confusing on what the solution is. And in this particular case, with the authorization headers, and so for example, if you had something like the authorization header is equal to the bearer and you had a foo comma bar, then something like this would have caused that argument error. And next, we got the disconnect all with the bang added to active record to close all connections. And this is basically a multi-database aware version of the disconnect. And next we got an app generator update around the JavaScript and CSS options. So let's dive into this pull request, and we got a nice little chart. And then we have the proposed changes. And so this is just overall good to know when you're creating a new Rails application, passing in those options, whether you're using import maps, ES build, and then you're passing in the different CSS options, essentially what gems are going to be included, what commands are going to be installed, and whether or not you need to have Node installed. And next, the model generator source path should allow for customization. However, if we go to the pull request that was referencing this one, it's all the way back from 2014. And so if you have a need to override the default behavior of the migrations, then you can follow this path, which will override the default behaviors. And for the next item, it's more of a call out that Justin Perkins had his first PR to Rails, which is awesome, but it's updating the comments in the YAML files around the translations relating to the boolean. And for the last item, make the test environment show rescuable exceptions and responses. And this is a pretty neat one because it more aligns your test environment with the production environment. And this is something before you would have to make a choice of high quality integration tests or some opaque error 500 message. And this option is basically giving us the best of both worlds. And so over the past week, there were 26 contributors to the Rails framework. So I appreciate everyone's efforts, especially the first time committers, and just all the efforts that you're doing to help improve the Rails framework. And if you would like to receive your own copy of the email newsletter, you can go to rubyonrails.org/newsletter to receive your own copy. Well, that's all for this week's video coverage of This Week in Rails. Thanks for watching.